right. Hi, everybody. David Fogel, CEO of the Symphonina Foundation, back with you. And I'm joined today by bassoonist Lindsey Wiehl. Lindsey, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
We have you up in Maine today, I believe.
Yes, coming from the cold state of Maine, where it's still we still have some snow on the ground. Had a snow day this week and everything. So we're still very much approaching spring.
Yes. Did you get to see the total eclipse last year?
I did. I was at about 99% totality. I didn't quite make it up to
Oh, no.
100,
Okay.
but it
Okay.
turns out that makes a big difference.
It does. My wife
I had
actually,
no idea.
I'm into space things, and I saw the eclipse in 2017 and wanted to see it again. And my kids were sick, I was sick, and my wife decided to fly back to Maine and drive all the way into some little town in the middle of nowhere there and saw it, and then had a very long drive back to get back to civilization afterwards, where everybody was trying to escape. But anyway, it was a great experience for her. And I do want to mention, as we get back to music things here on the Symphonina Foundation podcast, that Lindsey has been, as we say again in the music business, instrumental in our help, in helping us, I should say, as one of the bassoonists for the International Symphonina Orchestra, along with Bailey Holman, and has recorded multiple times for us, including most recently for Alex Unseth's Symphonina Number 2, which will be on our album this year, released probably in July. So thank you very much for that. You've been there at the beginning. We really appreciate that.
Absolutely. It's been fun.
Yeah. So okay, so I believe you started playing bassoon when you were pretty little, and probably the bassoon was bigger than you. So
Uh,
what was it that drew you to the bassoon?
So I had a musical family, so they were always kind of trying to give us new instruments to try. And originally I said, Mom, I want to be a flute player. I felt like that was like a very pretty instrument for a young girl, and I wanted to do that. So did a little bit of flute, but then I slowly realized that I'm more of a bass person. I really love those low notes and bass sounds. So then I switched to actually not bassoon, but string bass.
Oh,
And of
okay.
course, at that point, I was pretty young. That was my first string instrument around grade 3. And that was definitely bigger than I was.
Yeah, so
And
you're
in
like
fact,
10 or 11 at that point, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
I had to step on a little steppy stool to reach the
okay.
low notes on the bass. And I recall going to these concerts and thinking I'd worked really hard on my music and looking for a little recognition. And mostly what I got was, oh, you have to step on a step stool. That's so cute. And I was not having that reaction. I didn't want to be called cute if I was trying to be a serious musician. And my mom suggested I switch to bassoon, which was an instrument she had spent some time studying. After some pretty serious hesitation, she encouraged me enough where I felt like that was a good idea. So it was definitely mom influenced.
Yeah, what's it like playing a double reed instrument?
It is challenging. I feel like every instrument is
Every
challenging, right?
instrument is challenging.
They just have different challenging parts, and the challenge comes at different points. For double reeds, it's tricky at first getting a good sound, but I would say that's pretty universal for instruments that especially winds and brass. So getting a good sound is hard, but reed making, the dedication that comes along with that, and the financial aspect of what you need to do for your instrument can definitely be tricky to overcome at times, especially before you get that real job, right? All those years learning and proving that you're dedicated over and over again with an instrument that can be really quite finicky.
So when you say reed making, let's talk about that for a little bit. As you know, I'm a sax player, and for those of us who might see the video someday, they've seen the collection of saxes in my room here. So we don't make our own reeds, but boy, there are two options as a sax player, probably a clarinet player too. You get the reeds out of the box. Mostly they don't work very well. So you can either like, okay, throw that one away, or you can try to get a file. In the sax world, we have something called a reed geek. There's other people who have their other versions of it. I'm not advocating for a particular product here. Just, whatever version it is that you can sand things away on the reed until it starts to sound the way you want. And I will say I've had great success with that, actually, taking a reed that would otherwise be like totally, no, I'm not going to play that, to making it really good. It may be my favorite for a little while, then they tend to wear out and you go buy new ones, or accidentally you split them or whatever happens, right? But I'm hearing you have to make your own, and so this is like, okay, I don't have to make anything. I just have to make it better, which is a lot easier than making usually. So tell us about making your own double reeds. How does that work?
So it's definitely something that I have had to take classes for in
Hmm.
university, weekly classes of reed making for 10 years about in
Weekly
school.
class. So oboe, English horn, and bassoon have to do this.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. Although I will say for contrabassoon, it's a whole nother set of tools, similar tools, but a whole nother set. And I have not made that leap yet. I have a pretty good contrabassoon reed dealer, but I mean, it's always somebody hand making these reeds when they're
Interesting.
high quality. So
Okay.
I'm buying from another professional reed maker who
Hmm.
probably also plays bassoon and contrabassoon.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an arduous process. It takes weeks, actually, including resting time. So what you're doing is you're taking a plant, right? A bamboo plant. It's a special kind of bamboo, Arundo donax, and it goes through processing and this scraping down of the material into something that's usable. And then we go through a process of bending it and shaping it into something round that will fit on our bassoon vocal, which is that little bendy bit that comes out of the horn into your mouth. So between, forming it, really is, I mean, it's a plant that we're shaping into a tool. So we're working with something that is, has some part of it is a living thing, sort of, right? It's
Was it
not
one
quite,
time anyway? Yep.
yeah, it's not quite dead, really. And it
Hmm.
reacts to nature a lot. Like it'll react to the pressure in the air and temperature changes as do
Humidity, yeah, for sure, right? Yeah.
exactly all woodwinds. So you're kind of working with that system as well as developing a certain shape and shaving style that works with your own mouth. There's a kind of discovery that you need to do between the player and the reed to find out what really works.
That must be tough then when you're first starting because one, if you're starting when you're 10 or 11, I'm guessing you're growing, your embouchure is going to change too as you go. So it's not a one-time thing. And then the other would be, how do you really know what the best thing is for you until you've invested a long time of trying different things? So you could get used to one thing and then think that's cool, but then you've missed out on all the other things you could try, right? There's always that in life. So I'm sure you must teach bassoon too. So how do you advise your students to go on that life journey of finding the right bassoon reeds?
Well, it really depends on the age of the student, for me at least. I find that the earliest students might just need something to experiment with, something that is okay if they break,
Mm.
something a little more low budget, but then you also don't get quite the quality. So when they are ready to seek quality, which can be really quite early on once they develop a care for their reeds, make sure they don't get moldy in your case, which is a gnarly thing that happens a lot for younger players, and make sure that the trombonist isn't going to step on it when they drop, all of these different things with reed care. Once they're ready to take that step, I automatically am asking them to buy handmade reeds from any number of really great handmade reed makers. I do make reeds, but students need to find what price range works well for them and what style works best. And it's a lot of trial and error. It can be
Yeah.
very frustrating. As I had mentioned, that financial aspect of finding what works with double reeds can be a challenge.
Well, let's talk. I mean, I'm curious. So, I know a box of like tenor tenor reeds that I might get would be probably $35 for 10, something like that. If they're Van Dorens, I don't know. Some again, not advocating a product. Whatever works for you is great. But is it comparable to that price for a no, not at all, of course. Right. Yeah. Okay. What
So
is it?
yeah, a single handmade reed of a decent quality, maybe not professional, but a decent quality is about $20, whereas a more professional reed might run you closer to 28, and folks might even go up to $30
Okay.
per reed.
All right.
So it's definitely something you want to keep
Yes.
well protected
Have it
and
live its life appropriately.
live its full life.
Yes. And how long does it take to make a $30 read set?
I would
It's a
say
double
about
read.
2 weeks. Yeah,
Two
I would say about
weeks.
2 weeks.
Definitely not a
Uh,
lucrative business to be in. So it must be a labor of love for the bassoon reed makers.
Definitely. And you can make more than one over 2 weeks,
Hmm.
like a batch process, but there is a certain amount of rest time that needs to happen between steps. So there's a lot of procedure going on, and someone who really creates reads and has mastered that has developed again, a real procedure that works. So it's really a valuable thing when you find a great reed
Who
maker.
figured this out for the first time?
I have no idea. I think it was
How many hundreds of years has the bassoon been around?
the bassoon's been around. Well, it's gone through a lot of evolution. The most modern bassoon is what we call the German style bassoon, which came from German makers in the 1800s. Before that, we had the French bassoon, which had a little reedier sound actually to it and played high notes a little more free. But the German kind of has a little more force to it, a little more projection. I take that back. In a way, they're just a bit different. And before then, we were working with bassoons that were a bit more archaic, right? We start getting into the evolution of the bassoon and the dulcian and all of these medieval instruments that had, again, totally different reed shapes, probably less of a science going into it. But I would say the reed making community continues to evolve. New books and new handbooks and guides are being created within definitely the past 10 years that have, changed my view on reed making, and I keep them even in my case.
Yeah, let me ask one other question about reeds before I forget it, and then we move to a different subject. But in the sax world, in the clarinet world, we have synthetic reeds too. Like you can have a kind of a plasticky reed. Some people like them. You don't have to get them wet before you blow. They're pretty consistent, right? You put them on, you blow, and if you're going between one sax and another in a gig, that's sometimes nice. But is that even a thing in the bassoon, oboe, English horn world, or how's that working?
Yes, it's a relatively new thing, and there's a few companies that are kind of stepping into that. Ligier tends to be the kind of top one that has done the experimentation on it. But the tricky part about bassoon reeds is adjusting that reed. The way that they're put together by a professional bassoon reed maker that is using cane, we're using these wires that can then be adjusted with pliers to accommodate for, again, those changes in weather and temperature and humidity. But a synthetic bassoon reed is really harder to adjust on the fly. Although, again, you don't need to soak it. It comes with certain positives, absolutely. But they also have quite the price tag on these synthetic reeds. So it's, again, another investment.
Do you like the way they feel? I mean, for me, for example, I'm not a. I mean, I appreciate them. They do sound pretty good sometimes, but I'm so used to playing on a cane reed that when I get the synthetic in there, maybe it's just a function of not playing it long enough to get used to it. I give it that, but it definitely feels different and not in a great way to me. But everybody's different. So, what's your feeling?
So I remember the first time I tried a synthetic reed, it was at a conference where I could try out lots of things. And I was impressed and I bought one.
Hmm.
Actually, I bought two right away. And I was really impressed with them. But my instinct was, I think I need to open this up a little bit.
Mm.
And pretty soon I damaged it doing that
Oh,
and was left with something less than
less
ideal.
useful. Yes, right.
Yeah. So it just, I would be really comfortable with it if I had more control in adjusting it. Other than that, it's pretty impressive that it can
Yeah.
mimic quite a nice sound.
Yeah, it's good. Well, there's a long hit. I wonder in the old days if you mentioned the bassoon having a maybe a easier time in the upper to go for an upper range, if maybe there was a decision at some point where they said, well, let's leave that to the English and the horn and the oboe and let's focus on having a beefier low end. But I mean, I'm just guessing. I don't know how these things evolve, but maybe you do. I should say to everybody, Lindsey not only has a bachelor's and master's, but also a doctorate in bassoon performance, and I think it's a minor in music theory, and also she's very well educated on all these things. So maybe you have a little bit of that history.
Yeah, I think it actually started, well, with the increase, I think, of the size of the orchestra and these really important bassoon lines that need to come out, bassoon being one of the solo kind of wind instruments in the back. So I think we were competing with a larger and larger orchestra.
Mm, hmm.
I will preface saying that the French style bassoon is still quite popular in France.
Interesting.
Um,
Okay.
it is really interesting. And I've never been to France. I've never studied in France, but that was one interesting thing that I've seen. And I don't think the writing for the bassoon has necessarily been tamed, even with the change of the instrument. I think the fact that instrumentalists are improving and getting better and better every year retain that high range of the bassoon as something that we hear and see quite a lot in our music.
Okay. Well, that's all great. But I'm reminded of something just now. My dad was a great musician. He passed away many years ago, and my mom's still around. She played keyboard, harpsichord, piano with him, and he played flute and clarinet, saxophone, piano, and vibraphone, but also rumored to play bassoon. I never saw that, but I wouldn't put it past him. So I'm guessing that 50% of my genes have played bassoon. The other 50%, not so much. But the other day, I was going through some old stuff in the house and I found something that he composed from probably around 1950, which is a trio of, I believe it was oboe, clarinet, and bassoon. And I've got the handwritten, they're exquisite, like Mozart writings, not like Beethoven writings. They're very nice. So when I get when I get a minute or two after our album production is done for this year, I'm going to go to my Logic Pro and I'm going to MIDI them up and I'm going to see what they sounded like. And if they sound any good, then I'll get some live players like you, maybe, to, if you're available, to play the bassoon part, and we'll release it posthumously. And
Wonderful.
yeah, so okay, you've got a lot of students. Do you do online teaching? Do you do what do you all in person? How does it work for you as a bassoon teacher?
Yeah, so most of my students are through the University of Maine at Augusta, where I'm currently teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I teach a real variety of classes. Even though bassoon is my specialty, I do teach woodwinds as well as some core classes such as composition and arranging, music notation, and some audio production as well. So our program is really geared towards online learning because a lot of our students are very non-traditional, and it's almost funny. It's traditional being non-traditional at our university. We get mostly adults who are either currently working or have families,
Hmm.
or this is not their first degree, but they changed their mind and now they want to do music, or are looking for some certification as a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So we get a real great variety of students from all over the country and some from around the world. So it's a real treat having all sorts of learners in our classes that have all of these backgrounds to contribute to things like class discussions and show different interests.
Now, when you're teaching over Zoom, and I did take 4 months of violin over Zoom, just to get a little bit familiar with how violin works. Obviously, I'm never going to be very good at violin, so I set it aside. But time is valuable. But I did want to get a little bit of exposure to it. But I appreciate a little bit the challenges of learning over Zoom, because one thing is, I mean, you're not able to watch everything a student's doing,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe there are some important things that you would miss that way. But the convenience of being able to teach someone from 1,000 miles or 20,000 miles away overrides a lot of those things. But what do you
Mm-hmm.
think about the tone quality that you can hear in a Zoom performance when you're teaching? Do you find that to be totally fine and you're happy, or is that something that the Zoom people and other online people can do a better job on for you?
I think they can do a better job. I think there's some room for improvement still, but I will acknowledge that there has been a lot of improvement from 2020-ish when we all started
Mm,
necessarily moving things online. So the different settings have certainly improved, and audio settings, they can really be pretty good with the proper equipment. Certain microphones
mhm.
do a nice job at picking up the low end and all of our dynamics and things like that. But a lot of times, students don't have access to all of that, right? A lot of times we're on a big budget or we're just filling out lessons. So for younger students, more beginner students, it doesn't end up being such a problem. I can usually hear about everything that I need for that level
Got it.
of playing, where we're just making sure we're doing things correctly and safely and having fun and getting
Safely.
started.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, safely.
All right. All right.
Creating some good habits and
Yeah. Yeah.
not,
It's not a
but
baton. It's a
yeah,
bassoon. Yes. Okay. All right.
yeah. That and like also not creating like huge tension areas that are
Yes, sure.
really maybe possibly hurt them in the future.
Hmm.
So that I can all discern on Zoom, but I do love teaching in person. I do love being able to play in time with you, to play
Yeah.
duets. And that is something that Zoom doesn't quite allow yet. There are some other programs that are working to do that. But again, a lot of them require things like an Ethernet hookup, which is not always feasible for students at any given level, right? It really does depend on at-home situations
Yeah,
sometimes.
and a question out of total ignorance here: is there a connection between teaching bassoon and being able to also teach on the English horn and the oboe? Are they all kind of a family where they kind of go together, or are they like it'd be the same as teaching saxophone and teaching clarinet, which looks like it might be the same, but not really. And the keys are all different, and it's not an octave register, and all those things that make it no, not really.
It's a no, not really in the same sense to clarinet and saxophone. Really, the fingerings are all different.
Okay,
The fingerings for bassoon are similar to the Chalumeau register of the clarinet. Then oboe is similar to saxophone and the higher clarinet.
got it.
So,
Okay.
yeah, there's kind of like two real systems, and clarinet's cool in that it kind of contains both of those systems. So, I love teaching music educators woodwinds, being able to find those little tricks of how to answer those students when they raise their hand and ask for a fingering, how to seem like you have all of the knowledge. All of that, but,
Only because
uh,
you do. Yeah. Okay. All
yeah.
right, Lindsay. What are you working on? I know you have some maybe contemporary bassoon things we were talking about coming up. What are you working on for this year?
Yeah, so this year I'm working on creating a handbook on electrifying the bassoon. And that uses a pickup. There is a pickup called the Little Jake. This isn't the only way to electrify the bassoon and play around with this, but it is a cool way. Using pickups that are actually soldered onto a bassoon vocal that pick up vibrations, and then you can play around with the sound of that through pedals or through putting that sound into a digital audio workstation and manipulating that sound for just different characters, for fun, for performance, for yourself. So, kind of just working on a handbook on an introduction to how to get started in that. It can be pretty intimidating, not having a degree or any particular knowledge in things like processors and transducers, right? Like microphones, what do they do?
Hmm.
So, working on just a resource to welcome folks who are interested to trying this out.
When do you think you'll have your resource ready?
I think I'll have it about this time next year, and I'm
Okay.
hoping to make shorter articles to gauge folks' interests, then hopefully release that out
That
soon.
sounds good. Do you get kudos or credit for that as being an assistant professor at University of Maine for the work that you're doing? I hope so.
Yes, yeah, yeah. So that is part of my research right now, and I do get a little bit of time through my university as credit. So, for example, where some folks might be teaching 4 classes in a semester, right now I'm teaching 3. And part of that time is going towards the research on my handbook. Alongside that, I've been playing with looping and looping the bassoon sound and kind of creating a special notation to show how to read this and what to play in order to create loops. That's something that has been growing in my own interest. So I hope it's growing in someone else's too.
Yeah, when you're working on a resource book sort of thing, do you have audio samples that go? I mean, you must have a whole bunch of audio samples that go along with what you're trying to create. Otherwise, people wouldn't know that they're creating the same thing that you want them to create with the instructions that you're giving them. So
Right.
it's audio visual type thing. I think it would be great too, maybe in your promo to be able to give the samples of things so people would know, like, yeah, that's a sound I want to try to emulate and maybe use in a video game or a composition or whatever it might be for whatever it is that they're using.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, once you have the sound captured, there's no limit to what you can do with it using tools such as GarageBand, which a lot of folks have. If you have a Mac, you can get that for free, or there are other free options. And there are also very capable other paid options that you may have access to if you're interested in recording. So any way you can manipulate a vocal you can manipulate the sound of your bassoon. Or again, this would go into any classical instrument, really. It's more of an invitation for our typically classical instruments to delve into other genres that they might be interested in, which can be really empowering and fun.
Well, as you know, here at the Symphonina Foundation, our motto is to spread the joy of symphonic music to young audiences around the world. Young means younger than me, which is just about everybody now. And I would say if you want to electrify a symphonic instrument, I'm all for that. And it might even bring people back to the symphony music than the symphony orchestra instrument that was not electrified before they got in that way. So I'm all for opening all the doors we can open. I know you're also working on different scholarships and grants. Is that associated with the University of Maine, or is that something different?
Both. So some are associated with the university, some are a little bit on my own. Throughout the university, I'm working on creating an equipment library for our students, which would include things like microphones and interfaces, different cords that are necessary for recording their work since we do so much of it online. And maybe whereas a typical on-campus student might have access to these materials on campus at the university, our students are really often working with what they have and lacking certain things that I wish they had. So we're working on reducing that financial burden and welcoming more folks into studying this type of work.
So great. Are you taking new students online? Are you maxed out right now? How you doing?
I am taking more students online. I'm taking more students, and I'm taking commissions for compositions and songs, and I'm really enjoying all of it.
That's all. Well, I have to, obviously we wouldn't have Lindsey for 3 years as the International Symphony Orchestra bassoonist if she didn't do a great job. She does do a great job. So I encourage everybody, if you need someone to play some bassoon for you, to contact her. And if you do want to contact her, Lindsey, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Reach out via email, or I have a website, lindseywiel.com. LINDSEYWIEHL.com. And I have a contact form right on there that will go right to my email. That's the best way to get in contact with me. Although if you find me on some social media, I'll be sure to respond as well.
And are you active on TikTok or Instagram? What's your favorite?
Facebook is my current social media that I use the most to spread different projects and connect with folks. Instagram and TikTok, I usually actually only use for my popular style music, and that's all under my band name, Lab Rats.
Okay. Well, now we know to look. So that's good.
Yeah.
All right. Lindsey, thanks so much for your time today. We're going to listen to some more of your great bassooning. And we didn't get to contrabassooning, so we'll get to that next time. And I wish you all the best for 2025. And if there's anything we can do to be of help for you, you just let me know.
All right. Thank you, David.